I probably left out your favorite part. Al Horseman was the reader in the earlier service, and when I sent him the list of the scripture, he sent back and said, I want to read the other part. And I said, well, Al, when you're the preacher, you can choose what's read. I said, if you're ready to preach, just let me know. He decided to read the part I gave him. You know that part, and it is certainly well known to us, but there are two parts of this story that often get overlooked. And I want to call your attention to two particular sets of verses, one verse and a pair of verses. The first part is what happens to David after he realizes that Saul's armor is just not going to work. Verse 40 says, then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi, or the creek, the river, and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. And then the next 2 verses, which I think go to tell a story that I want to tell this morning, come at the end of what I call David's copycat trash talk to Goliath. Because Goliath is the one that starts it out and says, I'm going to tear you limb from limb and give your body to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the fields. And David just gives it right back to him. He said, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to cut your head off and I'm going to do the exact same thing to you. And then at the end, David says the words, I believe, that speak to us today. He said, this very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear. David's message is more than rock beats scissors, or that old school low-tech slingshots trump iron spears and swords. It goes farther than that. Long before Israel devolved, yes, I said devolved into a monarchy, when the judges were rising to the occasion of national crises and then fading into the background, Joshua was Moses' successor, and we have this encounter recorded in the 5th chapter of Joshua, verse 13, beginning with verse 13. Once when Joshua was by Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went to him and said to him, are you one of us or one of our adversaries? He couldn't tell. He replied, neither. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, what do you command your servant, my Lord? The commander of the army of the Lord said to Joshua, remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy. And Joshua did so. I believe this passage from Joshua and David's remarks to Goliath are a warning to us not to get so caught up in the war and not to fall for the myth of redemptive violence. After all, we had the war to end all wars from 1914 to 1919, and then we had to rename that 20 years later. It became World War I because we had another. And we've been having them ever since, and that certainly wasn't the first. And there certainly are too many to number. Korea, Vietnam, Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, and a few in between. And we are not alone. There are many others that we don't even mention. War going on in Sudan on an ongoing basis, and other places where we don't seem to have as much interest in ending wars. But King David himself interprets the violence of his own reign as the thing that prevented him from building a temple to God. In 1 Chronicles 22, he is talking to his son Solomon near the end of his reign, and he explains what he wanted to do, how he had desired to build a temple but could not. He says to Solomon in verse 7 of 1 Chronicles 22, my son, I had planned to build a house to the name of the Lord my God, but the word of the Lord came to me, saying, you have shed much blood and have waged great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you have shed so much blood in my sight on the earth. We live in a culture that is enamored with violence. A culture that confuses two things that I don't think go together. The first one is the much deserved and fervent support of and appreciation for all of the courageous men and women and their families who selflessly have served and do serve in the military with an unquestioning support. We have put that together, our unquestioning support and desire to honor and take care of those who serve. We have put that together in our culture with an unquestioning support of war, not only as a preferred choice of military policy and foreign policy, but maybe even as an edict of divine will. Now, I don't think those things go together. I believe with all of my heart that our military veterans deserve more, not less support and assistance before, during, and after their duty and service are completed. And I believe that they are too soon forgotten, both in our minds and our hearts, as well as in our government's budgeting. We give the myth of redemptive violence sway in our society. We have even culturally co-opted Jesus by way of the left behind interpretations of Revelation to make him into some butt-kicking ninja promising to return to earth as a lion, angry lion, avenging the first and apparently failed sojourn here as a lamb. That too, I believe, is a mistake. Mark Davis, who is a pastor, friend of a friend of mine, wrote a book titled Left Behind and Loving It, which takes a more scripturally complex look at Revelation and at all those apocalyptic texts. And this is what Davis says: the God who is made known to us in Jesus Christ is not the God whose way of salvation is accomplished through vengeful violence. In fact, he says, the cross is the primary symbol that God's way of salvation is the opposite of vengeful violence. I want to suggest to you today that we would do well to take the metaphor of shepherd boy David's 5 small, smooth stones drawn from the river of life, if you will, and ask ourselves not what weapons we need to violently subdue the world, but rather what 5 instruments are available to us, based on the whole of Scripture and the life of the one we call Messiah, that can be used to open the world and us to the ways of God, and to ask ourselves how we might gather those instrumental stones to share with the world. Where are these stones missing, and what can we do to reveal them? In the film version of The Hunger Games, which you just heard is part of the focus of our Vacation Bible School, is built around that tonight. There's a meaningful scene that is added to the film version to get across some of the message that gets lost in screenwriting, where President Snow, or whatever he is called, Snow, who is the oppressor in chief of the regime of elites, and the lead game maker, the one who takes care of making sure that the Hunger Games continue.
Seneca, why do you think we have a winner?
What do you mean?
I mean, why do we have a winner? Hope.
Hope?
Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. A spark is fine, as long as it's contained.
So,
contain it.
The second stone I would suggest is what I would call Jesus' instrument, not his weapon of choice. That is love. It is the power that overcomes, according to the Apostle Paul, not only violence, but even death itself. Jesus did not withhold love from anyone with whom he came in contact. The third stone I would suggest to you is forgiveness. Forgiveness opens the door to understanding unconditional love. All of the love that we give and share and try to control amongst ourselves has strings attached. It is conditional. It is only when we understand the love that God has for us that we begin to understand unconditional love, and we do that when we accept God's forgiveness for ourselves and when we dare to let God's forgiveness flow through us to others. Not when we ourselves forgive others, but when we allow God to forgive others through us. The fourth stone I want to suggest to you is mercy. Mercy might be considered to be forgiveness's twin sister. Mercy recognizes that her gift, her stone, ceases to be what it is if we require that people deserve or earn it. If you deserve or earn it, it's no longer mercy. The radical transformation of resurrection is that mercy is offered to us not because of who we are and what we've done, but because of whose we are and in spite of what we've done. And finally, the fifth stone, the pièce de résistance, if you will, it's grace. The unconditional gift that transforms us, not by obligation or guilt like so many others try, but by the overwhelming power of desire. Because once we get a true taste of grace, we recognize its unparalleled transformative capacity, not only for us, but for everyone. Once you've received it, it is an artesian wellspring that cannot be hoarded, withheld, or contained. It must be shared as the other five also. 5 small stones to remind us of the things that the earth so desperately needs. These small, smooth stones, the instruments of God, if you will, are what I challenge you to take with you every day. Hope, love, forgiveness, mercy, grace. The world is dying and killing one another in search of the true peace that these instruments offer. And wars will not end until everyone understands these and how much more powerful they are than war. And until everyone understands that these 5 do not belong exclusively to anyone. They belong to all of us. And as long as we attempt to withhold them, war will win. Hope, love, forgiveness, mercy, and grace.